My wife asked me if she could leave dinner with another man, and my answer drained the blood from her face. I smiled. A calm smile, full of pain and certainty, and said, "Of course, just don't come back to me." I got up from the table, leaving behind the expensive wine, the still dirty silverware, her still full plate. I left everything there, even my share of hope. I walked to the door with the dignity she'd forgotten there, on the white tablecloth stained with red wine and falsehood. That night, there was no scandal, no scene, no tears. Silence was the only sound that accompanied my steps. And it was there, in that absurdly simple moment, that I knew, it was over. Not love, not yet. But the illusion. In the days that followed, I didn't seek advice, I didn't post indirect messages, I didn't call mutual friends trying to understand why. I didn't want explanations. Because the cruelest thing of all wasn't what she did, it was how she did it. Sitting across from me, in a new dress, impeccable makeup, her lips painted the exact color I'd once praised, she looked me in the eye and asked me for permission to leave with someone else. As if it were normal. As if she wasn't shattering an entire story of love, construction, and promises. And the worst part, was that she expected me to say yes. And I did. But not like she imagined. I said yes, but with a yes that carried within it all the no's she never wanted to hear. I said yes like someone leaving a ring at the bottom of the sea, knowing no one else will pick it up. I said yes like someone closing a door and knowing the key won't fit. I said yes with my mouth, but with my heart full of goodbye. She tried to contact me. On the first 2 days, short messages. On the third, a voicemail that began with, "We need to talk," and ended with the heavy breathing of someone beginning to understand. On the fourth day, she called me 5 times in half an hour. On the fifth, she showed up at the apartment door, but I no longer lived there. And her lover's silence spoke louder than any apology. Because he never wanted commitment, only distraction. Just a moment, an escape, a warm body in the midst of emotional boredom. And she, so certain she was special, realized she was just another one. Only now, without me. Alone, she began to see clearly everything she'd taken for granted. The ready-to-eat coffee on Monday mornings. The flowers for no reason on Fridays. The arm that pulled her close in the wee hours, even while she was asleep. The patience on bad days. The loyalty on difficult days. The kind of love you don't find in bars or dating apps. A love that's home, not a party. But it was too late. Because when the penny dropped, the ground was no longer the same. And me? I rebuilt. Not in haste, not in anger. But with truth. I found someone who didn't need to lose me to value me. Someone who, with simple gestures, restored my faith in love. Who looks me in the eyes and tells me what they feel. Who listens without interrupting. Who respects me even in silence. And most importantly, someone who understands that love isn't just saying, "I love you," it's acting as if it were sacred. And for me, after all, that was too sacred to accept crumbs. When she returned, her eyes were full. Not of tears, but of everything I'd never said before. She arrived with that expression of someone who finally understood that pride exacts a heavy toll. She said she still loved me, that she was willing to start over. That she now saw how much she'd erred. But time isn't a tape we rewind. Time is a cruel judge. And it had already decreed, the end. I forgave her. Because forgiveness is for those who seek peace, not for those who want to get back together. I told her I hoped she would be happy, even though I knew that happiness would no longer include my name. She was left with longing. I was left with freedom. And freedom, when it arrives after pain, tastes like rebirth. But what she never knew, what stuck with me for weeks, is that very night she got me up from the table to leave with someone else. I had planned to propose to her on a trip. A surprise. We would take that dream trip together, the same one we talked about when we barely had enough money to pay the electricity bill. I bought the tickets, booked the hotel, organized everything. Everything was ready. All that was missing was the right moment. And she chose that dinner to ask me if she could leave with another man. I kept the tickets. I didn't cancel. I just changed the destination. And later, I went with someone else. Someone who didn't ask me to let her go, but who still chose to stay. She never knew it. But maybe she'll find out one day. Maybe she'll see a photo, or hear someone comment. Maybe she'll hear about the hotel, the place, how much she smiled. And understand, once and for all, that her love still existed, but it was no longer hers. Now, she sleeps with regret. She wakes with absence. And carries, every day, the weight of having exchanged love for adventure. Because deep down, betrayal doesn't just destroy trust. It destroys what could have been. It turns a forever into a if only I had known. And what remains, after love is gone, is not emptiness. It's conscience. The mirror. The echo of the wrong decision. And a question she will repeat silently, night after night: how was I able to lose someone who only wanted to love me? But the answer, that, she will never like to hear. Welcome to the channel. Here, we don't romanticize or justify betrayal, ever. All the stories are fictional, but the feelings they evoke are real. Our goal is clear: to show how betrayal destroys lives, erodes love, and leaves scars that time cannot erase. Get ready, you're about to hear a shocking, intense, and unforgettable story. His name was Ethan. He was 36 years old, with the steady eyes of someone who had faced life without losing his tenderness, and a serene way of being that seemed to contrast with the rush of the world around him. He was never a man of excess. He enjoyed black coffee without sugar, long, unhurried conversations, and the routine he had built with his own hands. He worked in urban planning and found poetry in the lines of buildings, the well-laid sidewalks, the park benches where the elderly still played chess. To many, this would seem banal, but to him, the details told stories. He lived with purpose. Every gesture was calculated not by coldness, but by zeal. He believed that love was caring, and he cared, for the home, the words he spoke, the silences he chose to maintain. His love was a calm but complete love. The kind that prefers to water every day rather than offer flowers only on set dates. She was Emily. 33 years old, with the smile of someone who carries a certain enchantment for the world, but a gaze that sometimes wandered as if searching for something they couldn't yet name. Intelligent, sensitive, effortlessly elegant. Emily had always been the kind of woman who walked into a room and, without saying a word, became its center, not by drawing attention, but by inspiring presence. She was an architect, and she designed houses like someone who designs futures. And when she talked about work, her eyes would light up in a way that left Ethan speechless, admiring. She had a keen sensitivity to aesthetics and emotions, and for a long time, he believed this was part of what united them, the ability to look deeply into things. Their marriage was, to outsiders, exemplary. There was complicity, care, and partnership. They weren't the kind of couple who made vows in public or shared everything on social media. But they had a unique language, looks that spoke louder than entire sentences, hands that met at just the right moment, a connection that felt solid. They had been married for almost 8 years and had a routine built on mutual respect. They lived in an apartment with large windows, light curtains, and well-tended plants. Their home smelled of books, of wine on Saturday nights, and of freshly brewed coffee on Sunday mornings. They shared silences without discomfort and difficult days without judgment. And even with the common flaws of everyday life, they had found a form of balance that many envied. Of course, not everything was perfect, and they knew it. But they believed that love was exactly that, dealing with each other's imperfections without losing their admiration. Emily, for example, was more impulsive. She made decisions in the heat of the moment, often acting with her heart before considering the consequences. Ethan, on the other hand, was extremely rational. He preferred to observe, reflect, and calculate before taking any action. Sometimes this created minor friction, especially when Emily expected immediate answers and he needed time. But these differences were seen by both as complementary. Or at least they were, until small cracks began to appear. Everything began to change almost imperceptibly. There wasn't a major argument, no obvious crisis. It was just small things. A cancelled dinner here, a distracted glance there. Emily started working late. She said she was involved in a new project, and Ethan believed her, not out of naivete, but out of trust. He'd always believed that trust isn't built on proof, it's built on commitment. And he did. He'd get home early, put the food in the oven, open a bottle of wine, and wait. Sometimes she'd be too tired to talk. Other times, she wouldn't eat dinner. She'd just kick off her shoes, say it had been a long day, and flop down on the couch in silence. And he respected that silence. He believed that love was also about giving space. But there was something different. Something hard to name. Emily smiled less. She spent more time on the phone, saying she needed to take care of office matters, and Ethan, out of respect, didn't intrude. Didn't ask questions. He knew that part of what kept them strong was precisely this freedom, the ability to trust even when the other's presence felt distant. But over time, this absence began to grow. The space between them, once comfortable, now felt empty. Conversations diminished. Their hands no longer touched as often. And the apartment, once filled with lightness, began to feel heavy. Despite this, he didn't give up. He believed love went through phases. And this was just one. He even planned to surprise her. There was a destination they'd always dreamed of visiting together. A place across the ocean, with narrow streets, flower-filled balconies, and sunsets over the sea. It was the kind of trip they'd promised to take since the beginning of their marriage. And Ethan, with his meticulous way, spent weeks organizing everything in secret. He bought the tickets, booked the hotels, and carefully selected every detail. He imagined her reaction upon finding out, the sparkle in her eyes, the tight embrace. He thought that maybe, just maybe, this would be their reunion. The moment they would reclaim what they seemed to be losing. Meanwhile, Emily seemed increasingly torn. Sometimes she showed tenderness. She kissed his cheek before leaving, left notes around the house as she used to do in the beginning. Other times, she was absent, as if struggling with something she couldn't say. Ethan noticed. He was sensitive enough to notice. But still, she chose love. She chose to stay. She chose to trust. He wasn't the type to give up easily. One night, sitting on the couch, she looked at him differently. A look he couldn't decipher. Long, intense, as if there was a request behind it, but also a farewell. He asked if everything was okay. She said yes, but her voice trembled. He didn't insist. He chose to simply hug her, and there, in the silence of that gesture, he tried to say everything he didn't know how to say. The dinner that would mark the beginning of the surprise was scheduled for a Friday. A discreet but elegant restaurant. A special place. Ethan dressed more carefully than usual. He chose the shirt she said she liked, applied a light perfume, and carried a small box with the travel tickets in his pocket. She arrived a few minutes late, her hair tied back in a different way, her eyes a little tired, but still beautiful. He smiled. She tried to smile back, but seemed hesitant. They sat down, ordered wine, and exchanged a few scattered words. He talked about the day, she listened in silence, fiddling with her napkin. Until she took a deep breath. The air shifted. Time seemed suspended. And that was when everything began to fall apart. But that was yet to come. In that moment, nothing was revealed. Only an invisible tension bridging the gap between them. Ethan didn't know yet. Emily hadn't said anything yet. But what was about to be said would change everything. Absolutely everything. And perhaps what she didn't imagine, was that he was already ready. Ready to offer her the world. Ready to share their future. Ready to fight for their love until the end. But she had chosen another path. And what he would do next, no one would ever have expected. The waiter approached with the main course as the tension at the table became unbearable, as if the air itself were too heavy to breathe. Ethan tried to remain calm, but something in Emily's gaze disconcerted him. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't sadness. It was the perfect mix of hesitation and determination, as if she were about to plunge off a cliff and, at the same time, knew there was no turning back. He watched her, attentive to the details, the fork twirling between her fingers, the way she looked away from his, the way she bit her lower lip uncertainly. And then, without warning, she looked up and spoke, her voice too firm for what she was about to say. She asked if she could leave early. She said she'd run into an old friend, that he was nearby and had texted, suggesting they meet up. Ethan slowly put down his cutlery. He took a sip of wine and smiled. A smile that didn't come from his mouth, but from his broken soul. He simply said, "Sure, just don't come back to me." Her expression changed instantly. It drained of color. Her fork fell to her plate with a sharp clink. She tried to figure out if he was joking, if it was just wounded pride, if that sentence held some hidden second chance. But he was already getting up. He left the card on the table, straightened his jacket, and left without looking back. Emily didn't follow. She sat for a while, motionless, trying to digest not dinner, but the mess. When she finally got up, she didn't go to find anyone anymore. She went home. Alone. And in the days that followed, Ethan's silence was absolute. No answer. No returned calls. No chance to explain. And as much as she tried to convince herself she still had time, something inside her was already telling her she didn't. His absence was like a house without furniture, the space was still there, but everything that gave it life was gone. She began writing messages she never sent, rehearsing apologies that never came out loud. And then, one morning, she opened her work email folder, trying to distract herself, and came across something that froze her entire body. It was a reservation confirmation. A hotel in Santorini. 2 tickets. 2 names. Exact dates. Everything booked weeks in advance. A gift. A trip. The trip of their dreams. This was where he would take her. It was that night, at that dinner, that everything would be revealed. Emily began to tremble. The trip she'd always wanted to take, the one he'd said they'd take, when the time was right, was ready. It was already theirs. But she hadn't even allowed the surprise to happen. Because she hadn't waited. Because she'd chosen something that now she couldn't even name. The next day, she decided to try to see him. She went to her old apartment. She rang the doorbell, and an unfamiliar voice answered the intercom, saying that no one by that name lived there anymore. She looked for mutual friends, but all of them, with discreet looks and closed expressions, said they knew nothing. And then, after much insistence, a mutual friend sent her a photo. The image seemed straight out of an old dream. Ethan, hand in hand with another woman, walking down a seaside alley. Santorini. Exactly where they should be together. He smiled, the same serene smile as always. But there was something new in that look, lightness. Peace. The woman beside him seemed natural there. There was no effort, no tension. She walked with him as if she were where she had always belonged. And that hurt more than any silence. Emily stared at that image for minutes, unable to blink. Her heart felt heavy. Her stomach churned. Her mind screamed all the words she hadn't said when she still could. And for the first time, she understood that losing someone who loves you isn't like losing a thing, it's like losing an entire world. She wanted to erase that image, wanted to forget, wanted to not feel. But there was no way. The truth had blazed before her eyes. Ethan had moved on. And there was no longer room for her in that story. In a last-ditch attempt to do something, she decided to write a letter. Not to ask him back, but to let him know that, deep down, she never wanted to lose him. It was too late. She knew. But there were words that needed to be said, even if the recipient no longer wanted to hear them. He folded the letter, put it in a plain envelope, and took it to her old address. She left it in the mailbox, foolishly hoping he would return one day just to pick up the forgotten mail. 2 days later, when he left for work, he found the envelope back in its own box. Unsealed, but intact. The letter was there, along with a short note, written in his firm handwriting. Do you still think everything comes back? I don't. And that was when the final penny dropped. The trip was no longer a dream, it was the past. Hope was no longer a flame, it was ashes. Forgiveness wasn't a fresh start, it was dismissal. Emily sat on the floor, the envelope in her lap, her eyes dry and her heart in ruins. She realized that Ethan's love still existed, but now he wasn't hers anymore. He belonged to someone else. Someone who arrived later, but who stayed. Someone who didn't have to ask to leave with another man because she chose to stay. She had lost everything the moment she stopped valuing what was essential. And now, all that remained was the echo of her own choices. Because sometimes, losing someone isn't about being left behind, it's about choosing to leave before realizing what you had. And when you realize it, the other person is already miles away, smiling in a different landscape, experiencing what could have been with you, with someone who never left. Months had passed since Emily's last attempt. Autumn arrived, dyeing the streets warm, but inside her, everything remained cold. The leaves fell like memories that insisted on returning, like the moments she relived silently, alone. The apartment she lived in no longer carried the sound of laughter, nor the footsteps of someone returning from work with a bottle of wine. It was a clean, organized, and utterly empty space. She tried to distract herself with work, immersing herself in projects, filling calendars, but no amount of work filled the hole that had opened inside her. Sometimes, she found herself making 2 cups of coffee, out of pure habit. Or stopping in front of airline ticket windows, remembering the fate that should have been hers. Other times, she stared in the mirror for endless minutes, trying to understand at what point, exactly, she stopped being the woman he loved and became just someone left behind. Ethan, on the other hand, walked in a different direction. Not in a hurry, not with fanfare, but with determination. The trip had done more than give him new landscapes, it had restored his very essence. For the first time in a long time, he felt light. Not because he hadn't been hurt, but because he chose not to remain in the place of pain. And alongside the woman who accompanied him on the journey, he found an unexpected connection. It wasn't a replacement, nor a patch, but a rediscovery of himself through a different perspective. She wasn't just a new companion. She was someone who saw his scars and yet touched them gently. Someone who didn't need to be convinced of his worth. And that, in itself, was love in its purest form. The relationship grew over time, with sincere exchanges, with presence. Without haste. Without comparison. With truth. Meanwhile, Emily was drifting away from her friends, stopped showing up for get-togethers, and turned down invitations. Not out of shame, she was too strong for that, but out of emotional exhaustion. She knew any simple question could tear her apart. And no one really knew how she was. Because on the outside, she remained the same impeccable woman, professionally admired and respected. But inside, every silence hurt like a stifled scream. One night, she returned home and found her old wedding album in one of the forgotten boxes at the back of her closet. She opened it on impulse. The smiling photos, the promises immortalized in images, Ethan's gaze trapped in photographic paper, it all seemed like a distant version of a life that now seemed to belong to someone else. She didn't cry. She couldn't anymore. The tears dried before realization dawned. She closed the album and put it back. But this time, not in the closet. In the trash. She moved on the only way she could, by surviving. But she could never trust in the same way again. She never loved with abandon. Every new connection came with the fear of repeating her own mistakes. And deep down, guilt followed her like a shadow. She learned to live with the absence, but she never forgot how much that absence was the direct result of a choice. Her choice. Ethan, a few months later, decided to sell his old apartment. He no longer wanted anything that carried the energy of a time that no longer belonged to him. He moved to a smaller house, with a balcony and a garden. A space where he could start over. And there, with his new partner, he began a different cycle. Simple, but full of truth. And one spring morning, while watering the plants with her, he received an unexpected message. A mutual friend announced that Emily was moving out of town. That was it. She was leaving. And with this news came an awkward silence, not of longing, but of closure. It was the final straw that was missing. And in that moment, he realized that, despite everything, there was something he needed to do. He wrote a short letter. Direct. Not to reopen wounds, nor to mend fences. But to set her free once and for all. He said he forgave her. That the past was where it belonged. That he wished her peace. Not happiness, because she would have to discover that on her own, but peace, to move on without the burden of constant regret. And he ended with a phrase only they would understand, a reminder of something said early in their relationship, a sort of private farewell. He didn't sign it. He left the letter at the entrance of the old building where she still lived, with no guarantee it would be read, but with the certainty that it was no longer about her. It was about him. And about the end of a cycle that had hurt him, but also transformed him. Emily read the letter 2 days before the move. And in that moment, she understood there was nothing more she could do. The pain was no longer an open wound, it was a scar. But still, it hurt. And always would. Because wasted love is irreversible. You can't rebuild what was undone by choice. Some mistakes teach you lessons. Some losses shape you. And some regrets last a lifetime. And this would be hers. Ethan finally found what he was looking for. Not just a new love, but a new way of being. More attentive to himself, more connected to the present. He didn't forget what he'd experienced, but transformed it all into a learning experience. Pain became strength. Abandonment became drive. Betrayal became a lesson. And life, finally, went on. Not as before. But better. Because now he knew, true love doesn't need to beg to be chosen. It just stays. And that's enough. Now I want to hear from you who followed this story to the end. What did you think? Leave your comment below and share your opinion with us. And if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future videos. Here, each story carries a profound truth about the bonds we form, and sometimes, unfortunately, unmake. This story shows us how betrayal doesn't just destroy relationships, it destroys dreams, respect, trust, and, above all, the value of a life together. It brings consequences that not even time can erase. So, remember, this channel does not support any kind of betrayal. Here, we tell stories to open eyes, touch hearts, and perhaps prevent irreparable mistakes from being made. Until the next story.